Hey everybody, so today we're going to be doing a very simple programming challenge that I got from the website Edabit right here. So if we click on Explore Challenges and we go to Challenges up here at the top, then we sort by C#, and then we go to Very Easy, we can see that we have a bunch of challenges here. And so we're going to be doing this one right here, this Convert Minutes into Seconds challenge. So our goal today is to write a function that takes an integer, minutes, and converts it to seconds. So that's what we're going to be doing today. So let's go ahead and get started. So we've got our goal right here written at the top of my project here. And let's go ahead and start writing this function. So we're going to run a return type of int because we're dealing with whole numbers here. We're not dealing with fractions of a minute or anything like that. At least, well, we could, but we're not going to be doing that today. We're just going to deal with whole numbers. We'll just pass in a number of minutes into this function, and then we'll pass back the number of seconds contained within those minutes. So we'll call it something descriptive. So we'll call it something like minutes to seconds. And then we're going to want to take a whole number as a parameter, and we'll call that minutes because we're going to be converting whatever is inside of this variable right here to a number of seconds. All right. And so it's screaming at us right now because we haven't actually returned a value from this method. So if it gets called, it's not returning an integer that we've defined here. So let's go ahead and return minutes times 60, since there's 60 seconds in a minute. All right, so this is our function. But if we run our program, nothing's going to happen because we're not passing anything in here. We're not outputting anything to the user. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's go ahead and close this terminal window. So let's go ahead and get our number of minutes that we want to convert from the user. So we'll go ahead and say console.writeLine to prompt the user. We'll say, hello, please enter the number of minutes you would like to convert. And then we'll go ahead and read the input from the user. So we want to declare a variable above this prompt, and we'll call it something descriptive. So we'll say int minutes. And we won't assign anything to it initially. And then we'll say console.readKey. And we will assign minutes, if I can spell, to be whatever is inside of console.readKey. And so it's going to be yelling at us right now because console, or we want read line, not read key, my bad. So read line will read a whole string, whereas read key would just read a character, but we want a whole line. So the reason it's yelling is because it's returning a string value where our variable minutes is an integer value. And so we need to parse an integer value from this readLine variable right here. So luckily there's a method for that. So we'll say int.parse console.readLine. So it will now take whatever the input from the user is and it will try to parse it to be an integer. So let's go ahead and run this now. So, well, actually if we run it, nothing's going to happen here either because we're not actually outputting anything to the user. So let's actually output the value that we get from the user after we run this method right here. So now we write console.writeLine, and we'll put our minutes to seconds variable, and we'll pass in our variable minutes into this minutes to seconds, excuse me, not variable, this minutes to seconds method. So let's kind of briefly go over this before we run it. So we declare our variable int minutes. We prompt the user with hello, please enter the number of minutes you would like to convert. Then we assign inside of this minutes variable whatever value we receive from the user. And then we write back to the user the number of minutes, or excuse me, the number of seconds that we get after we convert those minutes into seconds with this method. So let's go ahead and run this program, and it should prompt us. And look, there it is. Hello, please enter your number of minutes you would like to convert. Let's start with something easy. Let's enter a 1. Boom, gave us 60. So it's 60 seconds. So our program is working just fine. But if let's run it again, and if I enter something that isn't a number, let's say a character, and I press enter, it's going to yell at us. It's going to say, hey, the the input string was not in the correct format, and it's going to crash our program. So if I click continue, our program crashed. We can look right here that we threw an exception. So we need to handle that exception. We need to handle that in case that whatever the user ends up passing in, it's not actually what we're expecting, and we need to account for that. So let's instead keep prompting the user until they return something that we can use. So we're going to use something called a while loop. So let's say while, and then basically until minutes actually is able to have a value in it, we want to keep executing this loop. So I'm going to make minutes nullable, which just means that I can set minutes equal to null. Normally you can't do that, but it's useful in this case. We're going to do that. And we'll say while minutes is equal to null, or we can actually just say is. While minutes is null, we want to keep running this loop. And we're going to try to parse a value into this loop. And so let's go ahead and copy this, or cut it rather, and put it inside of here. But we don't want to pass it to minutes directly. Instead, we want to use a second variable and then use that variable to assign it to null. And here's why. So if I try to, we're going to use a method called tryparse instead. So we're going to say int.tryparse, and then we want to pass in a string, so console.readline. And then we want to take a reference to a variable as our second parameter. So this is very similar to parse, but let me kind of explain the differences. So try parse instead of returning, it actually might be helpful to keep this line here as well. So let's see the differences between try parse and parse. So parse, which is what we were using before, it's returning a value of type integer, whereas tryparse is returning a type of bool. So what tryparse is doing is it's saying we're going to try to read something from our input, but if nothing ends up actually happening, if we don't actually successfully parse a value, then we're going to return false. And if we do succeed in parsing a value, we're going to return true. And so it's returning a bool type rather than an integer type, which is important. It's an important distinction. And tryparse also has the second parameter that is an out variable, which means that we're going to be passing this variable by reference rather than by value, which means that whatever variable we pass into this method here as this second parameter, it will get assigned the value that gets parsed, assuming it does get parsed successfully. But if we try to pass in our minutes variable, we're going to have a problem because it's a nullable type. It's a nullable integer because we want to keep checking this while minutes is null. So we need to pass in a integer that isn't nullable. So we can declare just an int here and just say value. We'll say that this is the value of whatever we parse inside of this method here. And so since tryparse returns a bool, we're going to actually do an if statement. So if tryparse console.readline, if that succeeds, we need to do that, then we're going to go into this block right here. So if int.tryparse console.readline out value, if that succeeds, then we want to assign minutes equal to value. And then our minutes variable will not be null anymore. So it will break out of this loop and it will write to the line whatever's here. So while minutes is null, we're going to keep executing this over and over and over and over again. Okay, so let's actually prompt the user over and over again as well. So if int.tryparse, so if it succeeds, it's going to do this. And if it doesn't succeed, then we want to tell the user that the value they're entering is not working. So write console.writeLine. Please enter a legitimate integer value. Boom. There you go. Okay. So while minutes is null, we're going to create this integer variable called value. We're going to try and put something inside of value, and if it works, we'll assign minutes up here to be value. And if it doesn't work, then we'll write this to the console and we'll keep doing it again. And then once we get through this loop, we want to write out to the console minutes to seconds and then pass in minutes as our variable. And so right here, it's yelling at us as well because it's saying, hey, you're giving me a nullable value and I don't want to take a nullable value. So we can fix that by saying, hey, you can take a nullable int. And then inside of here, we'll say if int is not null, then return minutes, or not int. If minutes is not null, then return minutes times 60. And it's saying not all code paths return a value because if it is null, then we're going to have a problem. And so what we can do here is just say, we're going to throw our own exception and say throw new exception. And we'll say cannot multiply a null int, or cannot find number of seconds in null value. And we'll end that there. And then why is this still yelling at us? Cannot implicitly convert type int to int. An explicit conversion exists. So we actually have to cast this to be an integer, this whole value right here. And then we can return that. And actually probably, since we know after this while loop that this is guaranteed to have a value inside of it, because we're going to keep trying and trying and trying, instead we can probably just say accept an int. We'll nuke all of this. I'm learning as I go too, guys. And then we'll pass in just an int normally. Because we know that this will succeed because minutes is guaranteed to not be null at this point, because this will keep going on forever until it's not null. This is probably a cleaner way to do it. So we're going to do it that way. So now if we try to run this and saying, hello, please enter the number of minutes you would like to convert. And we enter stuff that's not legit. Say, hey, please enter a legitimate integer value. And we can keep trying, and it's not going to do anything until we enter 0. And then it'll print out 0 to us. And then we can run it again and say, please enter the number of minutes you would like to convert. Say 60, or let's do something smaller. Let's say 180 minutes or seconds rather. Awesome. And then we try to run it one more time, and let's say whatever this is. Let's say please enter a legitimate integer value. So we gotta enter a legitimate value, and boom, there we go. So we've made a nice little program that will convert minutes into seconds, and it will even do validation on the inputs, and it will output the amount of seconds that are contained in. We actually don't need this here anymore either. It will convert it into seconds. So I guess we can run it one more time since they made that change just to prove that it works still, but there you go. So that was this Edabit challenge on the very easy section. So yeah, that's how I do it, and I do kind of do this on the fly. So there's probably dozens of other ways to do this, and there's probably a lot better ways to do this as far as getting input, validating stuff. There's probably, a more efficient way of, verifying that minutes has a particular value, and or that it isn't null, or I don't know. That's the beautiful thing about programming, is that there's dozens of ways to figure out any particular problem. So yeah. Anyway, thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video.